Greetings guys, this is Omkaar Pattanayak. I am a third year BLLB student at NUJS Kolkata and I also teach GK and Current Affairs at CLATapult. Now, for your batch, I believe we are exactly 14 months away from CLAT 2027 and I believe that the countdown has already begun for us considering the nature of competitiveness that CLAT is demonstrating in the recent months. That being said, I'm here to provide you with a structured plan of action for the next 14 months with some amount of flexibility along the way so that we can cut some corners with time. We can factor in assignments, project submissions, pre-boards and other commitments, and we find ourselves in a position of confidence, composure and a fair degree of perseverance and patience in December 2026, assuming that CLAT continues to happen on that particular time frame. So that being said, I would request you people to have a piece of paper and a pen with you to work out the timelines along with me while I'm at it. Proceeding with the broader timeline, so I would divide it into two parts. The next 2 months until December 2025, I would consider that as a carnival point of time when we still have a lot of time to figure things out. We have time to maybe get comfortable with the idea of CLAT and get comfortable with the pattern of the paper, acquaint ourselves with what the syllabus is. I believe there is some initiation from everyone in this end, and even if you're just about to begin your preparation, it's completely fine. You're not late to the party. December onwards until next November is what I would consider the actual time for grinding and putting things into a course of action. So that's phase 2. Phase 2 again would get divided into multiple sub-phases, which is something I would address at a later stage. Now, until December from today, so September is about to end, so we have October and November ahead of us. Now, these are the 2 months where I look forward for you people to build your foundations in primarily 4 subjects: legal, logic, English and quant. Reason being they remain static. There isn't much to change in these subjects. I'm sure that the formulae in maths won't change because we would have a new Chief Justice in November, or the concepts of logical reasoning wouldn't change because we have a new Vice President. So these things remain static and it's wise to get your foundations clear and strong with them. That would require some amount of personal initiative for you people, maybe solve the sectional tests and mocks that are given to you, address a few concepts before classes are taken and use classes as a platform to ask questions and polish your concepts further. So during these 2 months, I would want you people to be diligent with whatever worksheets, whatever mocks and whatever classes come along your way, and particularly with quant, because I believe that's an Achilles heel for a lot of CLAT aspirants. Most of you, I believe, come from a humanities and a commerce background where maths is a major concern. So again, CLAT quantitative techniques is limited to grade 10 level of maths, and it's again very simple and very doable, provided a few basic fundamental concepts are clear. So topics like time, speed and distance, ratio and proportions, percentages, data handling and interpretation, graphical interpretations and other similar concepts are your Bible to succeeding in quant. Those 10 marks go a long way in building some sort of lead over others in the leaderboard. So don't ignore quant is my first advice to begin with. Strengthen that during these 2 months. Coming to legal, logic and English, fundamentally there isn't much difference in the kind of questioning you have. It's the kind of passages that you get, and the lines are blurry between logical reasoning and English comprehension anyways, where in certain mocks you might find a swap of the kind of questions you would expect. Legal reasoning again is mostly you have paragraphs coming in from a particular law or from a particular statute, based on which you have to use the same principles of logical reasoning or comprehension to come up with an answer. So these are 3 subjects which are kind of like a monolith and which form 80 out of 120 marks in your paper. So to give you an analogy, if you consider CLAT to be a pizza, legal, logic and English are supposed to be your base and your cheeses and sauces, and quant and GK are supposed to be your toppings. So get your base perfectly done so that your toppings complement your base and create a beautiful pizza for you. Now proceeding forward, like talking about the actual month of business, when I talk about December to November, I delve into how my subject comes into being, GK and current affairs. Now after legal reasoning, GK and current affairs is the second highest weightage holding section in the paper, and GK and current affairs as a section is quite volatile. For all you might know, you might study all the current affairs in the world and you might not find a single topic that you have studied in the paper. So it's a whole question of probability and likelihood of questions coming in, and no one can accurately foresee what kind of questions are likely to come in the paper. Regardless, it's like investing in the stock market or investing in equities. The better amount of market knowledge you have, the better amount of context you have about certain things, the better are your chances, the better are your odds of getting your section right and getting a good decent score to work with. So the whole principle of GK and current affairs is to begin with an acknowledgement that you cannot be omniscient. You need to accept your limitations and you need to accordingly structure and optimize your way around them to come up with a decent sort of a score in the end of the paper. Regarding current affairs, particularly the relevance window for you people, I believe, would be somewhere around November onwards until the October end of next year, assuming that CLAT happens in December, because I believe papers go into printing and circulation in November itself. So factoring that in, any sort of efforts that you need to put with current affairs ideally should begin November onwards. Until then, use October and the early weeks of November to acquaint yourself with the kind of information you would be expected to process and assimilate for CLAT current affairs. So that would include reading newspapers on a daily basis, particularly the editorials. And reading editorials would give you a sense of the kind of passages you would have in papers, because for most part of CLAT question papers, you would find newspaper articles copy-pasted verbatim and questions being asked from them. So the kind of analysis and pinpointed thought process that is required from you is somewhere culminated, somewhere nurtured in reading newspapers. So editorials of newspapers like the Hindu and the Indian Express go a long way in making you comfortable with the sense of language and the sense of vocabulary that is expected from you in the paper. Other than that, GK again is, if you go through CLAT previous year papers and even the mocks that are prepared for you, it's not about very straightforward questions and answers. To illustrate my point, a very straightforward question would be, when exactly was Delhi made the capital of India? When was the capital of India shifted from Calcutta to Delhi? Now, there's a very straightforward answer to it. However, questions in CLAT would tend to have questions like this, but then in addition to that, you might have questions like, which of the following is the best explanation for the reason behind shifting the capital from Calcutta to Delhi? So maybe option A could be that there's a rise in national movements across the city of Kolkata. It was a hotbed for nationalist movements. Another option could be that Calcutta was situated on the eastern flank of the country, which is very, very far from the actual center for politics and stuff. So Delhi was a better choice because it was more centrally located. A third option could be that Calcutta again was very, very culturally distant from the traditional capitals of India. So Delhi has been a center for power for years together. Talk about the Delhi Sultans, talk about the Rajputs prior to them, talk about the Mughal Empire. So the British imperial authorities, they wanted to replace and they wanted to present themselves as a substitute to the Mughals and legitimate successors to the Mughals. So that's the reason they came up with Delhi as a capital. And D could be some other option. Maybe at that point of time, Calcutta was a port city and there were a lot of concerns around it. Maybe security concerns were involved. So Delhi was a better centrally situated city, so it made a better choice as a capital. Now, all four of these options would have some sense of truth in them. It would make sense to maybe choose from any of those four options. And I believe historians would also have their own reasons to believe in all of them. But there's going to be one option which would have more relevance, and the question is phrased very diplomatically. Which of the following is the best possible explanation that you have in the list? Now, choosing this would require you to go through the paragraph and see what particular aspect of the shifting of capital or the transfer of capital is emphasized upon. So if your paragraph talks about the Delhi Darbar and how a big ceremony was held in honor of the king, and how the king came to India particularly, and the whole transfer of capital was announced, if that is the part of the passage on which emphasis is being laid, then you know your answer. It's option C, which talks about how the British wanted to succeed the Mughals legitimately through the optics of it. If a lot of discourse in the paragraph talks about protests in Bengal, talks about partition of Bengal and the implications after that, and also mentions how Bengal was reunited, how the partition was undone in the Delhi Darbar, then that makes your case in point for option B. Now, this would require some amount of interaction with the paragraph. You are required to read the paragraph in that case, and also go through editorials and stuff to have that sense of comfort and develop that analytical mindset that is required for you to proceed with answer questions like these. So GK and current affairs for CLAT isn't just about remembering facts and producing them again in the paper. It's also about making some sort of analysis from the facts that are presented to you and ensuring that you're able to think reasonably and logically with the threshold amount of facts you've studied about or you have supplied with. So that is primarily how you approach GK during these next 2 months, where you go through newspapers, you acquaint yourself with the language of the newspapers, and you figure out what are legitimate sources from illegitimate sources. So sources like Wikipedia, WhatsApp family forwards, or talk about random pieces of information you get from shady websites on the internet. They don't amount to credible sources of GK. And compendiums maybe, and talk about newspapers, talk about government sources like Press Information Bureau or any government websites, they amount to credible sources. This is a sort of a realization that needs to seep in the next 2 months. Proceeding to the months of serious business, so starting with December, again I believe a lot of you would have exams and there's going to be a general vacation sort of atmosphere around. So at this point of time, I would want you people to start studying compendiums and get comfortable with the idea of studying compendiums. I believe at this point of time, a sense of acknowledgement would also creep in about how compendiums cannot be substituted with newspapers. So even if you have a habit of reading newspapers on a daily basis and you don't miss a single day of reading the newspaper, a compendium would still be very, very helpful to you, because compendiums don't just limit themselves to the happenings that have happened currently. They go into the broader static context of a particular piece of information. Now, static GK for CLAT as an examination isn't limited to random standalone pieces of facts from the medieval or from the ancient times. So it's very less likely that you would be asked a question about the Indus Valley civilization or about the Egyptian civilization, unless, let's say, there is an archaeological finding concerning the Indus Valley civilization or the Egyptian civilization respectively. So there has to be some sort of a relevance which roots a particular static concept in the current affairs in the current times, and that is the sort of a link which you need to come up with, which you need to figure out. Coming about the way newspapers phrase themselves, so newspapers aren't meant to specifically cater to an audience which is preparing for competitive exams like yours. So it's meant for the public at large, and that is the reason a lot of the information that's presented in the newspapers is diluted. A lot of technical bits of the information are gotten rid of, which can be very clearly seen in the way court decisions are reported. So technical legal terms are gotten rid of, and the judgment is watered down in most of the news reportings that you have on specific cases. Now, that is not something which we can work with, because CLAT as an exam requires much more amount of detailing and much more amount of thorough understanding from you. So that needs to be factored in. Other than that, this is a particular malady which afflicts CLAT aspirants in particular. So there's a whole culture around UPSC. So a lot of newspapers, even if they try to make their columns specifically suited for competitors, they orient it towards aspirants of exams like UPSC or state public service examinations. So editorials tend to be generally verbose and very, very long and analytical, which is great to an extent, but the amount of objectivity that you need in CLAT as a paper, that is generally absent. So most of these papers tend to focus on how essays can be written from a specific point of view. These mostly focus on opinions and individual perspectives on things. So we have experts giving in their opinions and the pieces of mind on a particular concept, but very less amount of space is dedicated to actually explaining the concepts. So for example, if you have an editorial piece on India's monetary policy, so you would have experts talking about India's monetary policy and their opinions on it, but you will seldom find pieces, or you will seldom find spaces in the newspaper which talk about what the monetary policy is, what the instruments of India's monetary policy are, which is the governing authority for India's monetary policy. So these fundamentals are somehow missed out in newspapers, and that is the reason why compendiums, and specifically the compendiums that we provide you from a CLAT perspective, come into the play. So December onwards, I would really insist you people to focus on compendiums as a source of information and start working with them. Now, coming to November and December, I would give you that amount of time to settle in and sink in. January onwards is when we jump into serious business, and from January until April of 2026, that is what I would categorize as phase 1A. So this is part A of phase 1, where you start consolidating three things. Firstly, you get fully comfortable with compendiums. You start working on them on a weekly basis, and you have some targets for yourself and you finish them. Secondly, I believe a lot of you would have already developed some backlogs at that point of time. Backlogs are specifically when you're not able to keep up pace with the information that's provided to you in the form of compendiums, and you have a lot of work to catch up later at a later stage. So taking that into consideration, I believe this is a good point of time, January to April, to figure out how you are exactly going to cover your backlogs. There needs to be a strategy for that, and one suggestion that I can give is maybe don't dwell a lot on backlogs. For example, you have not covered the current affairs of the third week of January or the fourth week of January, and you have already entered February. Now, what people generally do is that they panic and they try to cover the third or the fourth week of January in the first week of February, compromising the current affairs preparation of the first week of February. Now, that is problematic because eventually there's a domino effect, and that keeps on continuing and keeps the whole backlog rolling and rolling until a later stage of time. And this is me imagining that you don't have any backlogs after that. For all I might know, at a successive point of time, you might develop more backlogs, and eventually there's a whole bunch of weeks where you haven't touched GK and current affairs of those particular weeks, and you're completely out of touch. So big backlog builds up. So to prevent that backlog build-up from happening, what I would recommend is proceed with keep pace with what's currently happening around you. So maybe you have backlogs from the last 2 weeks of January. Finish the current affairs from February 1st. and space out the last 2 weeks of January ke backlogs across the next 4 weeks that you have in your hand. So assuming that there are, let's say, 10 or 15 topics each from last 2 weeks, in that case you have 30 topics at the end of 2 weeks. So space out those 30 topics across the next 4 weeks. Put in some additional hours and try to figure out maybe 1 or 2 topics on a daily basis or on a weekly basis, and try to get your entire tally set on a sustainable tangent. So that sort of thinking needs to happen between January to April 2026, which is phase 1A. Again, a third part of going about preparation at this point of time is when I'm assuming you're going through compendiums and you have a backlog strategy in place. The third component of your preparation at this point of time should be to orient it towards the CLAT pattern of doing things. Now, there's no use of maintaining very elaborate paragraph notes when you're not able to retain information and you're not able to prepare that information in a CLAT format. CLAT asks you very succinct MCQ questions which are pretty objective, and a good way of remembering and retaining information would be to frame questions in a CLAT format out of the paragraphs that are given to you in the compendiums. So you can use the worksheets that are provided to you as a point of reference, and even you can refer to previous year CLAT question papers for the matter of fact, and try to frame as many questions as possible from the topics you're covering and maintain a question bank. This question bank will come as very handy and very important at a later stage, which will come to eventually. Now, this is phase 1A, January to April 2026. May to July 2026 is phase 1B. Now, these are months of actual grinding when I would look forward to you people starting your revisions on January to April while sustainably continuing with your preparations of May and July. So again, there's no end to the amount of revision that would give you a decent amount of proficiency with GK and current affairs. It's an open book, it's an ocean of information, and the more acquainted you are with the contours and the territory of the coast, the better are your chances of swimming through the ocean and ensuring that you land safely on the coast. So May and July, these are also, I believe you would also have your summer vacations during this point of time, and you would have more disposable time. So use that additional time that you have in your hands to cover whatever backlogs you have, number one. Revise whatever you have covered as of now from December until April, and continue with the current affairs of May, June and July. On the 31st of July 2026, I want you people to attempt whatever MCQs you have prepared, whatever questions you have prepared in a consolidated question bank on the 31st, to take a stock of where exactly you stand. Now, counting the total of all of these months, so from December to July, you have a sizable number of months. It's almost half your preparation window, and assuming that you come up with, let's say, 30 questions per topic, and there are 10 topics you're covering on a monthly basis. So you would have somewhere around 2,700 to 3,000 questions already ready by 31st July 2026, which is a good amount of information to work with, which is a good question bank to work with. So try to take care of that on the 31st of July 2026. Try to wrap all of that on that date. Now, coming to August, September and October. Speaking quite practically from my experience, I understand this is when half-yearly examinations would be around the corner and you would be preparing for your mid-sems and project submissions. So I'm completely excusing you for these 3 months. All I would expect you to do in these 3 months would be to come and give your mocks, attend your classes diligently, and solve whatever sectional tests come across your way. Other than that, if you can spare some time to read newspapers, that would be amazing. At least try to read the editorials on a daily basis, because that keeps you in touch with what's happening, and if editorials are not possible, then at least keep yourself up to date with some snippets or some sort of credible sources of information. Maybe just pore over the headlines. Stay in touch with the whole process of preparation, but we can cut you some slack during these 3 months owing to academic pressures. However, if you're taking a small hiatus until October, then November would prove to be a very, very intense month, where you're expected to take care of the current affairs backlog, that if any backlog develops over these 3 months, you're required to cover them in the first 3 weeks of November. So that would essentially refer to you covering August in the first week, September in the second, and October in the third. And along with that, parallelly conduct your revisions for whatever you have done prior to that, so that you stay in touch with what you did for the remaining part of the year. And again, revisit your basics in legal, logic, English and quant. During this month, I would also expect you people to solve with somewhere around 30 to 35 mocks, and this is inclusive of the mocks that you get to solve with CLATapult on a weekly basis. Plus, I believe some additional mocks are also in circulation during that point of time to prepare yourself better. So some 20-30 mocks would be on your way at that point of time. So solve all of them diligently. Take the last 1 week before CLAT, assuming that CLAT again happens on the 7th of December 2026. So from the 30th of November until the 6th of December, I would request you people not to engage yourself in further mocks, maybe solve sectional tests, revisit your GK question bank that you have prepared during this entire period of time. Take some lifestyle decisions which would go a long way in helping you maintain your calm and composure during the paper. Get rid of afternoon siestas, ensure that 2 to 4 are your most productive and optimum hours during the entire day. And other than that, the whole purpose of this plan of action is to ensure that you walk into the examination hall with a degree of composure and confidence, that you have put in your best foot forward, you have made the best use of the time that you had at your disposal. So I believe that is all I have to offer at this point. This is more of a guidance sort of a structure, so feel free to change the timelines and make something that suits you better, but come up with a timeline of this sort and maintain a journal of how you're spending your time to ensure that you're vigilant about the time you spend and you don't end up making a few wastages here and there and you end up getting stressed towards the later half of the year. So with that, I'll take your leave. Thank you so much and all the very best.